Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment with your thoughts or corrections, and share this video with fellow researchers and survival-minded historians, because what we're about to cover is not pop history or recycled trivia. This is a serious examination of how ordinary civilians turned kitchens, basements, farms, and streets into functional defensive systems during total war, and, well, why those lessons still matter today. When World War II expanded beyond battlefields and reached deep into civilian life, the home front became a front line in its own right. Cities were bombed, supply chains collapsed, governments rationed everything from fuel to fabric, and civilians were expected to survive, adapt, and contribute without modern conveniences or, frankly, guaranteed protection. What emerged was a remarkable culture of improvised defense and survival engineering, not driven by ideology or heroics, but really by necessity. These were not military engineers or survival influencers. These were families, factory workers, shopkeepers, and local councils solving life-or-death problems with limited materials, partial information, and constant pressure. If you want to understand real resilience, this is where you look. How civilian air raid defenses were built from everyday materials. Air raids forced civilians to confront the reality that survival often depended on seconds and preparation rather than official protection. In Britain, Germany, Japan, and parts of occupied Europe, households reinforced basements, cellars, and even stairwells into makeshift shelters. Concrete was scarce, so people used brick, timber beams, sandbags, and earth. The logic was simple but effective: absorb blast energy, prevent collapse, and stop shrapnel. One common method involved stacking sandbags around load-bearing walls and reinforcing ceilings with salvaged wooden beams scavenged from damaged buildings. Families learned to angle walls slightly inward so falling debris would slide rather than crush occupants. Ventilation was improvised using stovepipes, bent metal tubing, or even reinforced cardboard ducts because, suffocation killed more people than blasts in poorly designed shelters. Applied today, the lesson is not about recreating World War II shelters, but about understanding structural behavior under stress. Even now, reinforcing interior rooms, understanding load paths, and using mass to absorb energy remains valid for disaster preparedness. The principle is transferable, whether facing earthquakes, storms, or, civil instability. How blackout systems turned cities into invisible targets. Blackouts were not symbolic gestures. They were civilian-built defense systems designed to deny bombers visual reference points. Entire neighborhoods coordinated to eliminate light leaks. Curtains were layered with blankets, painted fabric, or newspaper glued together with flour paste. Street-facing windows were sealed completely, while interior rooms used hooded lamps and low-wattage bulbs. In some areas, families constructed light traps using angled cardboard tunnels that allowed airflow without light escape. Even cigarette embers became a concern, leading to widespread use of covered ashtrays and darkened smoking corners. This wasn't about compliance alone. Communities organized inspections, shared materials, and corrected each other because a single visible window could draw bombs onto an entire block. The modern application is operational discipline. Whether it's light, noise, digital footprints, or energy usage, the Second World War blackout teaches how collective behavior and simple engineering can reduce detection and risk. How civilians engineered fire suppression without modern equipment. Incendiary bombs caused more destruction than high explosives in many raids. Civilians responded by creating decentralized firefighting systems. Sand buckets were placed on rooftops, stairwells, and street corners. Water was rationed, so sand became the primary extinguishing agent for magnesium-based incendiaries. Families trained themselves to work in pairs, one person knocking the bomb off a roof with a shovel, while the other smothered it with sand. So food security, really became a kind of defensive strategy during these challenging times. Food shortages weren't just inconveniences, they were genuine strategic threats that could impact the entire war effort. Victory gardens, far from being mere propaganda stunts, actually served as vital survival systems for families and communities. Civilians, under immense pressure, learned about soil management, composting, seed saving, and crop rotation, skills that many had never encountered before. In Britain, for example, kitchen waste was systematically reused, either as compost or as animal feed. And, well, rabbits and chickens were often raised in urban backyards, sometimes concealed to avoid theft or issues with local regulations. Root cellars, which might sound a bit old-fashioned now, were improved with insulation, ventilation, and moisture control techniques, often refined through a good deal of trial and error. If we're thinking about applying this knowledge today, it's clear that food resilience really does begin at the local level. Back then, knowledge of caloric yield, storage longevity, and seasonal planning mattered far more than variety or novelty. Civilians during the Second World War prioritized calories, preservation, and reliability above all else. And honestly, that mindset is still relevant for anyone who's serious about long-term sustainability. Now let's talk about how communication and intelligence were protected, even at the household level. The phrase "loose talk costs lives" wasn't just a slogan, it was a genuine warning. Civilians developed informal operational security habits long before anyone even used that term. Windows stayed firmly closed during sensitive conversations, and radios were shielded to prevent any sound from leaking out. Notes were burned rather than simply discarded. Even children were trained not to repeat what they heard at home. And in occupied territories, coded language and innocuous phrasing became daily tools for survival. Quite remarkable, really. The modern parallel is information discipline. Whether dealing with digital surveillance or social instability, households during the Second World War understood that information control was a form of defense, not just paranoia. Why did these improvised defenses work when official systems failed? What made these do-it-yourself defenses effective was not the technology, but rather the mindset. Civilians accepted that no external authority could guarantee their safety. They observed threats, adapted solutions, tested them under real conditions, and refined them collectively. Failure was immediate and, well, instructive. Success spread quickly through neighborhoods. This created a culture of resilience rooted in practicality rather than theory. For modern survivalists and historians, the value really lies in understanding systems under stress. The homefront defenses during the Second World War show how people prioritize, simplify, and act when ideology disappears and reality takes over. These were not perfect solutions. They were functional ones. The resilience of the homefront was never about heroism in the cinematic sense. It was about preparation, discipline, cooperation, and relentless adaptation. These lessons remain evergreen because, while the variables change, the human response to crisis does not. If this deep dive added value to your research or preparedness thinking, do subscribe to the channel, share this video with others who take history seriously, and leave a comment with your perspective or sources. This channel exists for those who want to go beyond surface-level history and really understand how people actually survived.